Hello and welcome to Poho's Bullpen, where we talk about baseball and a little bit more. I'm your host, Seth Poho, and to discuss the 2019 Baseball Hall of Fame class, stepping into the bullpen, a past contributor to the Sporting News with his Cooperstown Chances articles, and a member of Sabres Oral History Committee, Graham Womack. Graham, thank you for coming on, talking about the Hall of Fame.
It's my pleasure, Seth. Thanks so much for having me on.
Honestly, the pleasure is on this side. I mean, I loved reading a lot of your articles of Sporting News, especially since you're going out there and actually trying to talk to former players who might not necessarily have been able to make it in on the writers' ballot, which kind of leads into the first thing I wanted to talk about. Obviously, today's game, the new era committees, the 10 names on the ballot, a lot of guys with some pretty good cases. Albert Bell, Joe Carter, Will Clark, Oral Hershiser, Davey Johnson, Charlie Manuel, Lou Piniella, and George Steinbrenner. But the two guys who got in via that committee vote, Harold Baines, of course, a lot of people definitely have their feelings about that, and of course Lee Smith. It's kind of interesting though, Graham. I mean, it's a different kind of dynamic with the era committee. You're not going in on the basis of just baseball writers picking those people. You're getting a bunch of different people, past players, former executives, maybe somebody from the media. So it really is interesting to see guys like Smith and Baines get in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing to know, obviously, is, the BBWAA and the era committees are two utterly different animals. I mean, the BBWAA is, this year there were 425 members who voted in this, the election with the results that were just announced the other day, with four really, really great candidates getting in, Mariano Rivera, Roy Halladay, Mike Messina, Edgar Martinez. I mean, it was, in my book, that was 4 for 4. There's some years where maybe there's a guy who squeaks in who I'm not thrilled about, but honestly, I've been a big booster in Mike Messina's case for a long time. I was a big booster Edgar Martinez, and then, Rivera, he could probably, he's more than likely the best reliever in baseball history. I'm kind of curious if Craig Kimbrell will wind up, challenging that eventually, but as of right now, Rivera's in a class all his own, and then, it's funny, Roy Halladay, I didn't know how he was going to do, in the vote this year. I took some heat for tweeting out, a while back, that he would be, somewhere over 50% of the vote, just because I really didn't know. But, he got 85% of the vote, and good for him, or rather good for his family since he so sadly passed away.
Well,
Guys like that getting in. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's all right, because, it's funny you bring up, Halladay. It sounded like as if he was definitely going to get a strong, reading from some other writers, it felt like as if he was going to get a strong early return, but I didn't think he was going to get in first ballot, to be honest.
Yeah, I figured he'd get about 65% of the vote, and that he'd probably get in next year. And I honestly, I think one of the things that's happening is, this guy I know, Ryan Thibodeau, who I'm sure you know, he tracks all the votes that are announced in real time, and I think what happened with Halladay was he did so well out of the gate that he wound up kind of riding that, and it was kind of influencing other writers who were filing their ballots. So this is all what happens with the writers' ballot. The era committee is the polar opposite of that. It's 16 basically members who meet. They meet privately. There's no expectation of transparency. You only need 12 votes to get in, and so all sorts of stuff can happen with that. A lot of times, with the era committee, and before it, it was called the Veterans Committee, and I consider them basically to be the same thing. You could sort of count on certain guys getting in, and guys, basically, there's this one stat that I know of, or this trend that I know, that if you get even 30% of the writers' vote, there's like a 90% chance that you're eventually going into the Hall of Fame. And what it is, I think it's a combination of things. I think the committees partly look to, the guys who've done well on the writers' vote to populate the ballot. And then I also think, too, that guys who would do well on the writers' ballot are more than likely to be the same type of guys who do well with the committee. So when Lee Smith was on the ballot this year, I figured, okay, yeah, he for sure is going in. He topped 50% of the vote with the writers. Obviously fell short of 75%, but he still did really well. Players spoke highly of him. He's no Mario Rivera, but he's one of the best relievers in baseball history, one of the better closers, and a pioneering one at that. Harold Baines, though, was a surprise. I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I don't think he ever did better than about 10 or 15% of the writers' vote. I did not see him getting elected this year. Like, I was sure that I figured that Lee Smith probably would, but it was my wife and I were coming back from a Christmas party, and Kate was like looking at her phone, and she goes, "Oh, the results of the Hall of Fame, got announced for the today's game era committee. They inducted Lee Smith and Harold Baines, and when I heard Harold Baines, I was like, what the heck?"
I had the same reaction because I agree with you. Like, I mean, I don't think Baines ever really did draw that great numbers with the writers. And honestly, I mean, we know the backstory about how he got in. I mean, he got by with a little help from his friends on the committee there. But even just on his the old school numbers, I like to call them, the old, batting average, RBIs, runs, hits, apart from the career total, which was nearing 3,000, it wasn't like as if there was anything that glamorous about Harold. I mean, again, congratulations to Harold. I mean, great career that he had given his injuries, or given, the longevity problem that I think a lot of people have factored he would have in the 80s. But you're thinking, of all the guys, not like a guy like Piniella or Steinbrenner, but you're like, really? Harold Baines?
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of how I felt, but I think, so it's interesting. So I'm almost, I wouldn't quite call myself a Harold Baines apologist, but I haven't had the kind of raw, visceral reaction that a lot of people have had. I mean, for starters, people who I don't have a lot of respect for are like, oh, the Hall of Fame's broken now, anybody's going to get in. It's like, please, give me a break. I mean, the big point in, like, Harold Baines' favor is that basically the 1981 and 1994-95 strikes arguably cost him 3,000 hits. Like, I totaled it out recently, and I think either if he played every game canceled by the strike, or if he played the same rate of games, he would have had like 2,986 hits. And I figured he probably would have stuck around and got the last 14. So he probably would have had 3,000 hits. There's no hint that he did steroids, so it's in the minds of traditionalists, it wouldn't be a tainted number. I'm personally fine. Even I don't believe in throwing out records of guys who are implicated in steroid use, but Baines did that. I mean, after David Ortiz and Edgar Martinez, he's probably the greatest DH in baseball history. Made a number of All-Star teams. He's not a horrible selection. He's not great by sabermetrics, but goodness, I mean, the Hall of Fame's put worse players than him in there before. And man, yeah, if you want to go back to some bad selections, Tommy McCarthy in the 1940s, Alexander Cartwright in 1938, I want to say, 37 or 38, and then a whole just run of just terrible selections in the late 60s and early 70s. Everybody from Lloyd Wayner to Jim Bottomley to Fred Lindstrom. I mean, Baines is better than a number of the worst selections that are in Cooperstown, and that have long since been there and haven't caused the place to go defunct.
Well, and that's a funny thing too, because when you look at players, especially on a ballot, you can't necessarily just say, oh, they have to be the best at their position or best at what they do. I mean, realistically, when people are complaining about guys like Jack Morris, the sad reality is you're like, Jack Morris is actually probably a little bit of a better pitcher than Catfish Hunter. And as much as there's always that kind of idea of what Catfish Hunter was, guys like him weren't necessarily that great if you go by Jay Jaffe's JAWS system, or even looking at ink, at the ink monitor on these guys. It was the thing that I was taking away from the Baines selection was, trust me, this is not the first, and it won't be the last time this will ever happen for a guy on the Veterans Committee.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and the thing is, too, basically this year, obviously the committee voted in Lee Smith and Harold Baines. Last year, it was Alan Trammell and Jack Morris. Prior to that, they didn't put a living player in since Bill Mazeroski in 2001. I mean, basically after that time, the committee stopped voting annually on the same era of players. They've tinkered around with the format a number of different ways occasional Harold Baines getting in and no living players at all. I mean, I look at guys like Jim Cott and Dick Allen and, sadly Manny Minoso, who passed away after the last time he got, that he, didn't make it. I would rather have the occasional head scratcher selection of a living player than just no one at all. Like, I think no one at all living getting in is much, much worse.
No, I agree with you there because, I mean, think about it. You think about Ron Santo got in that way, and they missed, he died a little under 2 years from him getting inducted in. And it's like, he had those great numbers, and he had that terrible reputation that he wasn't, quote-unquote, as good as he was, especially since, I mean, third base is a position that hardly ever gets that many guys elected. And it's going to be interesting shifting gears towards this year, because I know we were just talking about before we went live, the idea of Lou Whitaker. I mean, Trammell had the huge bump in the last several years from the sabermetric community saying, you guys definitely undersold how good Alan Trammell was, which, watching a bunch of old Tiger games off YouTube, you can see why. And then you watch Lou Whitaker play, you're like, man, this guy was good too. Hopefully, I'm hoping that he gets in. But, again, it's a different animal. It's not the writers. It's a bunch of different people from different walks of life making that decision.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, basically, you look at the last time, that Whitaker could have been up for consideration, when Trammell and Morris got in. I mean, to me, it was a travesty because Whitaker didn't even make that ballot. And a lot of the things you can say about Alan Trammell, you can say about Lou Whitaker as well. I mean, by sabermetrics, I want to say they're both in the top 10 at their position. I love the stat wins above average, not wins above replacement, but wins above average. And Lou Whitaker is Trammell's in the top 10 for shortstops by that measure as well. Trammell obviously was helped by the fact, that he should have won. I want to say he should have won AL MVP in 1987. I think he finished second overall.
Yeah, because I think George Bell got it, and then because that was of the old era of I think whoever hits the most home runs or runs batted in usually wins those things.
Oh yeah, no, it was a bad selection by sabermetrics. I think even at the time, I think there probably were. I would imagine there were people like Bill James who were scratching their heads and in his annual abstract, kind of wondering, okay, what the heck just happened. But yeah, I don't know. It's tough because Whitaker, by traditional measures, I think he's a 285 lifetime hitter. He's a guy. I've interviewed both he and Trammell, and Whitaker's kind of a low-key guy. I mean, he's big into his faith. It's funny. It was I've had a couple of these kind of interviews where, so I'm not religious, and I didn't include this in my article, but I know, like, Whitaker and Dwight Evans, they both tried to proselytize to me, and it's just like, I'm good, but, it's funny, so the connecting with some of these guys, I don't know, I'm hopeful. I tweeted out the other night that, or I tweeted out last night that I thought that now would be as good a time as any to get a campaign going for Whitaker. And I don't know how to do that with the committee, but he's the kind of guy who has not gotten his due. I mean, I think he got 2.9% of the vote from the writers the only year he was on the ballot. You get less than 5%, you get removed from future ballots. So they gave him really no consideration. And, the Veterans or Heirs Committee, to me, it exists for candidates like Lou Whitaker. That is the charge of that committee. Whereas Baines might have gone the full 15 years he was eligible. He was at least on the ballot, probably 5-6 times, I want to say.
I'd imagine he probably hung around, but it feels like as if you almost need to have that find a way to tap into that Jonah Carey kind of thing, how he was able to get Tim Raines in. You need to find that kind of grassroots campaign. I feel like to get guys like Whitaker and the guys you mentioned earlier, guys like Jim Cott, and of course one guy I will always defend that you talked about, and you had a great article on Sporting News about, was talking about Dick Allen, because I definitely think, without a doubt, Dick Allen is one of those guys that is terribly overlooked, especially since his entire prime was in a terrible offensive period for modern baseball, and having, of course, that reputation, which really soured with the writers. And, well, I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, you lose the writers back then, you weren't going to get in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Dick Allen, he obviously, he had some problems that were of his own making. I mean, he he would occasionally be absentee for games. I think he had some issues with drinking, but my goodness, you look at his power numbers, you adjust for his era, you look at like OPS plus. He's one of the best hitters in baseball history. He's not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, you adjust for his era, you figure, I think he had 351 home runs in his era. You put him in the 90s, or you put him even just in a decent offensive era, you're probably adding at least 100, 150 home runs to that total.
Yeah.
And not to mention, too, he played in a horribly racist environment, in Philadelphia. I mean, that place was horrible to black fans.
Well, I mean, it's funny. It's funny because it's like, you wonder why Kurt Flood didn't want to go to Philly. He saw the writing on the walls, and it was Dick Allen.
Yeah, and I should say, too, I said horrible to black fans. I mean, horrible to black players, obviously. But, yeah, no, I mean, Flood, he famously wrote that letter in December 1969 to Bowie Kearns saying, I don't feel like I'm a piece of property to be sold irrespective of my wishes. And, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, I think, looking at the experience of players like Dick Allen and being like, oh, heck no, I do not want to do that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that'll go next year. But switching gears over towards, we talked about it earlier, the baseball writers' ballot results. It was a slam dunk that it was going to be Rivera getting in. Obviously, it was amazing that he got unanimous on that. You had, of course, Edgar Martinez, which I was glad that finally happened because, regardless of how some people would feel about the designated hitter, as of course a lot of people have been posting, it's been around forever now. It's been around for a good number of years. It deserves to get some credit. Halladay, of course, we talked about, and Mussina, which, to be honest with me, it was a little bit. I don't want to say it's a little bit of a shock because I'm always so used to hearing those Chris Russo people who say Mussina wasn't good enough for the Hall of Fame because he never won the Cy Young, those kind of arguments. But it's like, I always kind of take the attitude of, I don't know, if this guy was playing any year he was in the league, would you want him? I don't know if there's a bad year of Mussina that Mussina had in the league that you go, why would you not want this guy on your team?
Yeah, I mean, Mussina in his prime in the 90s seemed like an automatic 19-game winner pretty much every year. I mean, he was one of the best pitchers in the American League, with the Orioles, and then he went over to the Yankees, and he never seemed to be generally quite the ace that he was in Baltimore, but he was still a great pitcher. And then he had that fantastic final season where, he won 20 games, I want to say at age 39, and just went out on top. And yeah, unfortunately, I mean, he fell short of 300 wins. If you don't understand what ERA plus is, then you would think maybe his ERA at, like, I want to say 368 was a little high. I mean, obviously, if you know ERA plus, okay, you adjust for his run scoring environment in his stadium and whatnot, and he's about 23% better, I want to say, than an average pitcher. So yeah, he's just fine. He's better than a lot of guys who were in there who just were lucky enough to have their careers in the 60s or 70s. I was thrilled Mussina got in this year. I wasn't really expecting it. I figured for sure that Rivera and Edgar Martinez were going in, but yeah, I didn't predict Roy Halladay, and then I for sure didn't predict Mussina.
That one really got me, and then of course looking at one guy who it'll be interesting to see what he can do in a Veterans Committee vote. Obviously, it was Fred McGriff last year, and let's be realistic here. These ballots have been bloated the last several years. I mean, look what happened to Lance Berkman and Roy Oswald. Not to say that those guys are necessarily Hall of Famers, but you'd think that they would have a better, if there was no limit on the votes, you'd think they would have done better. But what do you think about McGriff's chances in the future, possibly on a Veterans Committee?
So, it's interesting. I was looking at this today. So, I mean, the way that basically the Veterans Committee splits things up right now is they have 4 different eras depending on when your best years are judged to have been. There's something called the Golden Days Baseball Committee, which is pre-1950 players. Oh, no, wait, that's the Early Days Baseball Committee.
Yeah.
There's the Golden Days, which is the 1950 to 1969. There's the Modern Baseball Era Committee, which is 1970 to 1987, and then there's the Today's Game Era Committee, which McGriff would fall into, which is 1988 to now. So the challenge is that the Today's Game era met basically this year, and they alternate basically depending on years. Next year is supposed to be the Modern Baseball Era Committee. The following year, they're doing a joint meeting of the Golden Days and the Early Days. The Early Days only meets once every 10 years, and Golden Days is once every 5 years.
Right.
And so basically, the next 2 years are taken up with the other eras, and finally, for the 2022 induction year, you finally get the Today's Game Era Committee again. Basically, they'll be meeting at this time. Shoot, what would that be? Like 3 years from now or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a ways out there. I mean, and it's going to be, McGriff will be. It'll be the first time it'll be up for consideration. I haven't looked at it, but there'll be a number of other guys who by then are eligible. I think you have to be retired 16 years to be eligible for the Today's Game Era Committee. So it's like right now, what is it, 2019? I mean, so guys have had to have been retired since 2003. But anyway, I'm sort of rambling. But I think McGriff should have a really good chance, but it still could be competitive. The biggest thing working in his favor is that, he fell short of 500 home runs because of the 94-95 strike. And seeing what the committee was willing to do for Harold Baines, it's funny, I had this friend through Twitter, this guy Jonathan Mitchell, and I think he tweeted out after Baines got in that he was willing to bet his house that the committee would put McGriff in. But still, I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns, and obviously McGriff played through the steroid era, and so maybe the committee looked differently at McGriff than it did at Baines. I don't think McGriff was ever thought to have used steroids, but still, you don't quite know for sure. But if I had to predict, I would say McGriff is probably getting in 3 years from now. But,
it would make sense. It would make sense so that he would avoid that kind of cloud from the era, because I mean, it wasn't like as if he had a physical build that would dictate it. He looked pretty much more or less the same. He never really had any habits or necessarily, let's say, teammates who were associated with it per se.
Yeah.
But then,
absolutely.
And then speaking of final years, obviously next year on the writers' ballot, last chance for Larry Walker. He had a huge bump this year. And then we're also looking at the last 3 years for guys. I mean, you talk about the steroid era. You're talking about guys like Bonds, Clemens, Sosa, and Schilling, which it's going to be interesting to see if those guys are going to be able to even get near 75%, let alone meet it. I imagine Sosa won't, because, I mean, he's been hovering in, the 20s the last couple of years. I'm actually betting that Sosa will never get in through the writers' committee in the next 3.
I mean, Sammy Sosa might be a guy who gets in 30 years from now through the committee, but my goodness, I mean, he's just, his chances do not look good. But then, a few years ago, I mean, and obviously the big context here is steroids, but a few years ago, I would have said the same for Larry Walker. He was at like 11% of the vote, and just didn't look like he had any chance at all. And now, he looks like he could get in next year. I mean, Derek Jeter is going to be the only first ballot pick. After that, there's any number of other guys who could really see their stock rise quite a bit next year. And I think Walker is probably the most likely. I think if Kurt Schilling could just keep his mouth shut, he probably would have gotten this year with Mike Messina. Statistically, they're pretty close to the same guy in terms of sabermetrics.
Right.
Mike Messina is polite and reserved and intelligent, and I don't know if Kurt Schilling's any of those things. And then, as far as Clemens and Bonds goes, I tweeted out the other day that I figured they were getting in 2021 just because they've been slowly building their votes. But there are a lot of people out there right now who think that the writers are against them, or the writers who are against them just aren't going to change their mind at this point. That, I think each of them is around 59% of the vote right now, and it's just, I think there's a lot of people out there who don't think that they're going to be able to close the remaining 16% that they need.
It's kind of disappointing, though, because, I mean, it's so hard for me as a huge baseball historian, and not to say that the Hall of Fame is the end-all, be-all kind of place. It's not like as if it's like the Vatican City for baseball. I mean, for me, it's just a nice museum that's out in a small New York town. But it's like you're not having plaques of probably one of the greatest power pitchers that's not named Nolan Ryan in there, and not having one of the greatest baseball players in there. Feels like as if it's like, okay, so what, we're whitewashing history now? I and that's just my personal feeling, is that I kind of hope that we can see those guys get in, even though obviously, they're obviously going to be writers and fans who are adamantly against that.
Oh, absolutely. absolutely. I mean, this is nothing new, but I mean, and I was the first person to think this up, but I mean, Clemens and Bonds were Hall of Famers before they ever touched a steroid. I mean, my opinion is that, put it on their plaques that they each had, serious steroid implications or accusations against them. But there's so many other things you can talk about in terms of their careers that, um, depending on your view on steroid, Bonds is arguably the greatest player in baseball history. I mean, yeah, it's an incomplete place without them, and they're not Pete Rose or Shoeless Joe Jackson. I mean, they didn't throw the World Series, they didn't bet on their own teams. Neither of them did anything in my book that should rule them out forever. And frankly, I mean, even with Shoeless Joe, I'm somebody who thinks that it's been 100 years now. You can buy guns, be bygone. Pete Rose, I'm not sure on these days, but.
Well, I mean, not to say that Pete's necessarily helped out his cause on trying to get any sympathy over the last couple of years.
I'm a big believer in Bonds and Clemens. And honestly, some writers can be so sanctimonious when it comes to stuff like that. It's not that City, my goodness. I mean, and people are going to go out and start, using steroids and record numbers. Bonds and Clemens finally get in after, paying a considerable penance as far as, just 12 years they've had to wait to get in.
Well, and obviously, the steroids wouldn't be the worst thing in the world considering what guys used to take back in the day. But again, what are you going to do? Graham, it's great that you were able to join us. I'm really glad to get some insight from you on the Hall of Fame. I love talking Hall of Fame, and having a guy like you who has great amount of research and knowledge about it, it's been a thrill.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. That means a lot to me, and yeah, anytime you have me on here, I'm always happy to talk to the Hall of Fame for baseball history.
Oh, I'll definitely take you up on that.